want to introduce kind of the trajectory of where we're headed today, so everyone's on the same page. We had our Redd Center board meeting this morning, and we appreciate the board members that are in attendance. They'll be coming and going. Some of them have classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they're trying to fit us into their schedule. We have this opening session, which will go until about 2:45. And this is the commemoration of the 50-year history, and we have a number of directors and associate directors who have served faithfully for all these years. And one of my colleagues from the, well, I'll get into that later. Then we'll have a birthday cake break, because we all need cake. So we'll do that in the library first floor. I'm not sure what the room is, but it's where the saddle and butter churn are, so if you arrive there, you're in the right place. And then in the afternoon, we have a session where we get to hear from each of the Redd children, and they can say the things that they would like to tell us about their family and their relationships with BYU, etc. There's a banquet for those who have RSVP'd and have reservations tonight, and then at 7 p.m. everyone is invited back here to the Annalee Nagley Redd lecture, which will be delivered by a distinguished colleague from the American West Center at the University of Utah, Gregory Smoke, and he'll be talking about the role of centers in the West. So we're very excited about that. So by way of introduction, we will have each of the people just introduce themselves and their relationships with the board. And then after their introductions, introductory remarks, Tom Alexander is going to provide a little history of the center. He's one of the individuals who was here at the beginning with Leonard Arrington in 1972, who worked with Annalee and Hardy and others to establish the center that Charlie had supported. So we're excited about that. Then I have a series of questions that we'll ask the panelists, and they can choose how they want to respond, or if they want to respond as we go to that point. One thing I did want to highlight is the role of centers, and part of these are from Stephen Danvers' journal about centers of the West. I did a study of all the Western centers in the United States, and I think the Charles Redd Center is the third oldest center, so it's been around a long time. I think the only ones older are the American West Center at the U of U and the Buffalo Bill Center in Cody, Wyoming. So it's in good company. But this is what Stephen said: it's the people who make the difference at academic centers that study the West. The directors, the staff, they have a true passion for their work. They appreciate every opportunity to share that passion with other scholars in the region, students in their home institutions, and the general public. Their role in communicating the importance of the history of the West to the public is written in their founding documents. It is also creating forums where the public can engage with scholarship regarding the issues that are relevant to their regions and the lives of the people that live there. All issues, no matter how contemporary, have history. And one of those most important roles of these Western centers has been to engage with the public about that history, helping to illuminate the ways in which understanding that history helps people understand their worlds. And certainly our esteemed guests that are sitting in this table in the front have played a very key and crucial role in helping tell that story of the Intermountain West. So with that, we'll have everyone introduce themselves and tell what they have prepared for their introductions, and then we'll have Tom present on the history, okay?
I'm Thomas Alexander. I was director of the center, and I was there at the beginning.
I'm Jessie Embry. I was hired in 1979 to do oral histories, but then with Ms. Meg assistant and then associate director by some wonderful, outstanding directors I got to work with. One of them, unfortunately, was Bert Wilson, who is no longer here, but then I worked with him.
And I'm Ed Geary, who had the good fortune to follow Bert Wilson, the contributions he made, and to arrive pretty much at the same time as the Butler and Peters endowment became available, which dramatically changed the resources available to the Redd Center.
I'm Brian Cannon. My first contact with the Redd Center was when I applied unsuccessfully for a grant as a master's student. So in writing rejection letters, I always let people know that they were in good company. But subsequently, when I was in my PhD program, I received a grant that was very helpful to me in my dissertation research. And then as a new faculty member, I was fortunate to repeatedly receive grants from the Redd Center to fund my research. And finally in 2002, I believe it was, I followed Ed as director of the Redd Center and was there for about 15 years as director.
My name is Jay Buckley. I followed Brian in 2018. I'm also a member of the history department and the director of the American Indian Studies minor here at Brigham Young University. And I'm just so excited to be with them, and wanted to tell you that one of the things that I wanted to do as director was to compile a 50-year history of the center. So it's still at the press, but we have a couple copies of this administrative history that we're going to share. I want to thank all the students and faculty who helped me with that project, and also Amy Carlin, who did an indefatigable job on helping me compile it. It's quite a process to put together books, no matter what kinds they are, so thank you.
My name is Brendan Rensink. I'm the current associate director at the Redd Center and associate professor in the history department. I've been at the center for 7 years this month. I showed up in March of 2015 with the commission to help run the place and develop some new public history and digital history initiatives, and they haven't fired me yet, so I'm still here, and really honored to be part of what has been 50 years of just supporting so much really great work here in the region. So it's a great place to be.
Jay asked me to, is that working? Jay asked me to speak about the founding of the center. In 1969, Dean Acheson, who served as Secretary of State during the organization of NATO, the Truman Doctrine, and the Marshall Plan, published a book entitled Present at the Creation. I've thought that also a number of us were present at the creation. We were present in 1972 at the creation of the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies and the Lemuel Hardison Redd Jr. Professorship in Western American History. And all of us helped to vitalize the study of the American West. I'd like to know how many of you were there in January 1972 at the reception for the creation of the Redd Center. Quite a number of you. A great many threads came together to form the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies and the Lemuel Hardison Redd Jr. Professorship in Western American History. One of them was and perhaps most important, was the interest of Charlie and Annalee Negley Redd in the history of the people who built the American West. In fact, Charlie made it clear that that was his main motivation in establishing the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies. That is, he wanted to tell the story of the men and women who built the American West. We should understand that Charles Redd had a wide range of interests, the sort that you might not expect of a rancher from LaSalle, Utah. Charlie had entertained Lord Halifax, the ambassador from the United Kingdom, at the LaSalle Ranch. Charlie promoted American-British cooperation to such an extent that Queen Elizabeth II awarded him the Order of the British Empire. In the United Kingdom, he was Sir Charles Redd. He was involved in a large number of business and professional organizations. He interested himself in academics, and he frequently sponsored seminars in which intellectuals like O.C. Tanner and Sterling McMurrin discussed significant issues with him and with others who were invited. After he and Annalee moved their family to Provo, they became close friends with several academics. They were closest to John Hale Gardner, chair of the BYU Physics Department, and Robert K. Thomas, professor of English and academic vice president. John Gardner especially urged Charlie and Annalee to donate their money for the establishment of a Western Studies Center. The center could do what Charlie hoped to be able to do, that is, to tell the story of the people who built the American West. In 1964, the University of Utah established the American West Center, which was the first of the centers to be established for the study of the American West. It happened that Ted Warner had joined the BYU faculty the year before, in 1963. In 1964, Jim Allen transferred from the Religious Studies Department, and I joined the History Department faculty after studying for the PhD at the University of California at Berkeley. The three of us worked in Western American history, and we became close friends. We knew that the University of Utah had established the American Studies Center that same year, and the three of us believed that BYU could also support a Western Studies Center. We discussed that possibility frequently, including during the fall of 1964, as we traveled together to Oklahoma City for the annual convention of the Western History Association, and at other times during our travels and in our associations with one another. At the time, Richard Bushman was a member of the BYU faculty, and he agreed that BYU should sponsor a Western Studies Center. He made a proposal to the BYU administration for the establishment of the center. Ted Warner, Jim Allen, and Richard Bushman met with the BYU administration to discuss the proposal. The administration agreed that the university could establish a center if someone would endow it, and if Leonard Arrington would agree to come from Utah State to BYU to direct the center and accept the endowed chair. John Gardner was most influential in convincing Charlie and Annalee that establishing a center and making a chair was the right thing to do with their money. In an agreement with the university, Charlie and Annalee donated $500,000 to establish the center and chair, partly in cash and stock, and partly in the value of their current home. As I understand the agreement, the university agreed to allow them to occupy their home during their lifetimes, after which their estate would donate the value of the house to the endowment. In fact, this worked out differently because after Charlie's death, Annalee moved to a condominium in Three Fountains in North Provo. The university named the center after Charlie as the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, and the chair after his father, the Lemuel Hardison Redd Jr. Professor in Western American History. The university and the Redd Center and the Redd family scheduled the inauguration of the center and the chair for January 20th, 1972. On that day, those who played a part in establishing the center, Charlie and Annalee, members of their family, many of you are here today, and members of the BYU administration met in the Sky Room of the Wilkinson Center to inaugurate the center. Leonard had accepted appointment to the Redd Chair at the same time, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints called him concurrently as church historian and recorder. In view of the dual appointment, the first presidency of the church and BYU President Dallin H. Oakes worked out an arrangement that allowed Leonard to serve half-time as church historian and half-time as occupant of the Redd Chair and Redd Center director. With the agreement of the history department, Ted Warner and Leonard asked me to serve as associate director. Leonard and I had worked together during the time I was a student at Utah State University and at the University of California at Berkeley in writing and publishing a series of articles on Utah's defense installation. Leonard said at the time that I had written more articles in collaboration with him than anyone else. Leonard had, however, other plans for the future of the associate director's position. He told me that he expected that I would serve for a couple of years in that position, and after that, he expected to bring Dick Paul back to BYU to take the associate director's position. I have to say, I have Charlie to thank for my continued service as associate director, and then later as director. Dick Paul had served in the BYU History Department faculty for many years. By the time the university established the Redd Center, however, he had moved with our former dean, John Bernhardt, to Western Illinois University. John had been appointed Western Illinois' president, and he took Dick with him as administrative vice president. While Dick and his family lived in Provo, they were neighbors of Charlie and Annalee. Dick was a liberal Republican and Charlie was a conservative Republican. The two of them often disagreed on politics and had a number of arguments about public policy. And some of you who were around at that time may remember some of that. Shortly after the establishment of the Redd Center, Leonard and I had sat down together and mapped out a program for the center. Among other things, we agreed to publish a monograph series, to schedule monthly lectures, and to appoint an advisory board of people with various academic specialties. The university established our headquarters in offices on the 4th floor of the Harold B. Lee Library. After we agreed on the program, Leonard and I made an appointment to meet with Charlie and Annalee in their home. By the time the Redd Center was established, unfortunately, Charlie had experienced a severe stroke. He was confined during the day in a wheelchair. He could not speak, but he could make his wishes known in his throat and in his mouth. According to appointment then, Leonard and I met Charlie and Annalee. We told them of our plans for the Redd Center, and both of them seemed pleased with the program that we had proposed. Leonard then told them that he planned to bring Dick Paul back to BYU to serve as associate director. This evinced a loud and obviously negative response from Charlie. Annalee explained that the two of them had some disagreements on politics, and that Charlie would not want Dick to be associated with the Redd Center. Charlie apparently had no objection to my serving, and I continued to serve as associate director until 1980, when Leonard was released as church historian and he assumed the directorship of the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute for Church History at BYU. I should say that I developed a close relationship with Annalee and with the Redd children. I think all of you would confirm that. Since university rules do not allow anyone to serve as director of two centers here, Leonard retired as Redd Center director, and the university appointed me to the position. Some people have said that I was really director of the center and that Leonard was really only a nominal director. Nothing could be further from the truth. Leonard taught classes in Western history and economics at BYU, and the two of us met frequently together to decide on the appointments of the Redd Center board and to plan the Redd Center's programs. He directed the center, and I carried out the day-to-day operation. I was happy to work with Leonard and to have been associated with him during the years I served as associate director under his supervision. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was a wonderful introduction. I was just remarking as I was sitting here listening and watching the group here that Bert Wilson's the only one that's not with us right now from the 50 years of leadership in the center. That's quite remarkable to have all of us at the same table. And hopefully Jesse can tell us about Bert a little bit too in your conversations. We'll have a few questions. First one. Why did regional centers become so popular in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s? And what relationships or what role or niche did the Redd Center have in carving itself amongst this pantheon of centers?
You want to answer that?
Go ahead, Jess.
I put it in the history, but it was taken out. So one of my favorite books is That Noble Dream about objectivity in American history. And in the 1960s, you have a lot of ethnic centers being established and a lot of regional centers being established. And that's where the regional centers, not just for the West, but for the South and many other places, were formed. And so that's how the Redd Center fits into those. There were other centers, and that's why the center eventually decided to do Intermountain West rather than California had centers and other places had centers, so that's the reason it was established that way.
So in terms of how this center has related to other centers, in the years that I was affiliated with the center, we did several things. One thing that we did, I think a lot of our collaboration came out of a trip that Jessie made where she visited most of the regional studies centers, and so that we could get some sense of what they were doing in different locations. But subsequent to that, for several years at the Western History Association, we had a gathering of directors and personnel from all of the centers. We had a panel at the Western History Association one year, the Centers of the West, where we talked about work that was being done there. We've been, because lots of us have we all have public history dimensions. We've also been involved in supporting initiatives of the National Council on Public History and receptions and events that they've held also. So those are some ways that we've related to other centers.
Yeah, I just want to say, when I came here, I'm a Western historian, but most of my work was on borderland regions and not the Intermountain West. So when I first came to the center, I felt a little bit constrained because all the projects that I wanted to give money to and fund were kind of outside of our sub-region within the West that we focused on. But after a few cycles of all of our funding and everything, and seeing the kind of work that was being done in the Great Basin and in the Intermountain West, I became fully converted to the power of not just a broad Western Studies center, but one that focuses on a specific region, especially the Great Basin and the Intermountain West, which I think broadly in the West is often overlooked, underfunded, and doesn't get the attention it needs. So I like how the Redd Center serves some broad Western goals in conjunction with lots of other regional study centers, but also serves a very specific sub-region that really benefits in unique ways.
So now a little personal question. What do you consider some of your main contributions during your time with the Redd Center?
And here I want to speak on behalf of Bert Wilson. So the Redd Center started out with marvelous historians. They had Leonard Arrington, they had Tom Alexander, and I came in as a historian, and that's mostly what we did, although we tried to be Western studies and not just history. And when Tom was no longer the director of the Redd Center, they had Bert Wilson, a marvelous folklorist, be in charge. And Bert went out of his way to add people to the board that were from other disciplines to emphasize his folklore. And I remember one of my favorite stories is that when we were voting on who should get awards, Levi Peterson said, "Mine never gets selected." And so Bert made it a rule that everyone that gave a first place for an award automatically got an award to make Levi Peterson happier. So I think that without Bert being added and brought in our expansion, we would have might have just stayed mainly history. And even now the staff is mainly history, but Brendan's done a lot of things of bringing wildlife and other groups in, fire. So we've been fortunate to, and then from me and from Bert, we then moved to Ed Gary, who also brought in that English kind of approach and that local history approach. My contributions.
Please. Isn't there over 2,200 oral histories?
Well, most people see me as the person that did the oral history. What I like to say, and I had the support of Tom Alexander in this, is I belong to the Oral History Association, and lots of people just did oral histories and they got stuck on the shelves of an archives. And I wrote books about the oral histories. And the most important thing I did was I wrote books, not just that I collected oral histories.
And I have to say that I was supportive of that while I was director. Jesse did some wonderful work, particularly on minority groups in the West, from the oral histories that she and her students took. I have to give a great deal of credit to Jessie for the work that she did while she was oral history director at the Redd Center in publishing the results of those oral histories.
I'd like to add that Jesse's specialty in oral history is kind of the visible part of the iceberg, and the contribution she made to everything else the Redd Center did during the time she was associated is the deep underground that only those who work closely with her, I think, can appreciate for for what it amounted to. At the board meeting today, one of the things that struck me, and I don't know how many other regional centers would compare to this, was the extraordinary disciplinary diversity of the Redd Center's activities and support. So that I think is something that is accumulated. It's, Charlie Redd was a person of broad interests, intellectual interests. Leonard Harrington certainly was, so that was there from the beginning. Bert Wilson, I think, brought we've spoken of Charlie Redd's desire to tell the story of the people who built the West. Bert Wilson's passion was for the folk, the people who built the West and didn't ever get any credit for it, whose names are not in the historical record in an important way. And I think his passion for that then has in turn translated itself out into a desire to bring biological range sciences, a variety of other disciplines in. And I think that these really, the record is large enough now that we can see how much these things complement one another and the work of the Redd Center. Well, my contributions is that I was fortunate enough to follow Bert and to have Jesse in place there. And for the first time in the Redd Center's history, we had the funds to do the things that before we'd always thought would be nice to do, which is to establish some lectureships, enter into the intellectual life of the university in that way, to develop relationships with a variety of professional organizations by sponsoring prizes or activities or other things, foster the production of worthwhile academic books by offering subventions. These were all things that I think would have been important to anyone, but having for the first time funds beyond just kind of keeping the lights on and the doors open enabled us to begin something that the trajectory of it, of course, has only grown and expanded since that time.
So prior to my time, I know that there was a monograph series that the Redd Center had and symposia also. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, those were done during the time that Leonard and I were directors. Some of the things that we started during that period. But right near the end of the time that I was director, I realized that we really didn't have enough money to do all of the things that we wanted to. I thought at first that we could do some kind of a campaign to get money. That didn't work out very well. And I learned really fast that people don't give money to organizations. They give money to people. And so I went to the Redd Foundation, all of you here today, people that I developed a good relationship with, and told them that we'd like to get $1.5 million from you. They came back and said, we'll give you $500,000 if the university will match that amount. Well, right at that point, I left the directorship and Bert Wilson came in. He went to LDS Philanthropies and they said, there's no way we're going to give you $500,000. So Bert went to the university president, Rex Lee, and Rex happened to live in Bert's ward and was a good friend of his. And Rex said, there's no way that we're going to turn down $500,000 just because the university won't take an equivalent amount out of the money that others donate to it. And so we were able, because of Bert, to use that money that I obtained from the Redd Foundation and to put it in the Redd budget.
So there's another funny part of that story, which this is probably more the truthful one. But Bert used to say, it's a good thing I drink Coke and Rex Lee drinks Coke, because you couldn't get Coke on campus, so they met at a convenience store, and that's where Bert said the story happened.
Jay asked me to just talk about some of the things that happened while I was a director. One of the things that we did was to host topical seminars, and this is something that had been done much earlier also, but we reignited that spark and held topical seminars, and then Jessie and I worked together, or in some cases Jessie worked all on her own, depending on which project it was. So we would invite authors to come together, or in some cases we would issue a call for proposals on a topic. Our first one was Utah in the 20th century, and then we would have researchers selected to come together. We would pre-circulate their papers, we would meet in small groups and critique and workshop one another's papers, meet with an academic editor, and then come away from the symposium or seminar with a plan for revising our papers and for putting them together in an edited volume. And so those are some of my favorite memories, working the seminars that we had, getting to meet people, getting to discuss their work, and then seeing that work into print, and that's something that's still going on. Another thing that had started before my time, but continued to expand in my time, and it's already been alluded to, is that we began increasingly to include the sciences as well as the humanities and the social sciences in our grants, and to fund research in those areas as well. And then one last thing that we were able to do is begin having visiting fellows where people would apply. In some cases, this was done in collaboration with John Murphy and Special Collections, where we were able to provide funds for individuals who wanted to come to BYU to do research in special collections, to come and be here from 2 to 4 weeks doing research. So that was one type of a visiting fellow that we had. And then we had a longer term, semester long in some cases, visiting fellow that allowed us to bring in scholars from outside, from across the nation, or in some cases from other countries, to do research and to work here at BYU.
I would add that sometimes the interdisciplinary reach of the center is not as apparent and visible as it actually is. Often our public lectures or the anthologies and seminars we've hosted have been mostly history, social sciences, humanities. But if you take a moment to look through all the projects that are funded every year, with faculty, grad students, public organizations, there is a tremendous amount of money going out to people in environmental sciences, biologists. I mean, you name an academic discipline, and we've given them money. And I don't know if many other centers really have that disciplinary reach, so I think that's quite unique. One thing, when I came, I was asked to try to do something digital. I don't know if they knew what that meant or what they were asking for when they hired me, but they knew that the internet existed and we could do more with it. And I arrived and immediately saw that the Redd Center is doing so much stuff, and the world is just not aware of it, and there has to be some ways to raise the profile of work that we're already doing. So that's why we're live streaming this event, which is something that I started. And for all of our lectures, we usually have some people online watching, and then we post them online. I started a digital public history project called Intermountain Histories. That's a website and a little mobile app that curates little students research and write these little micro histories of events around the region. And then I started a podcast where I interview writers who are writing about the West. And all these initiatives are ways to that I envisioned as how can we use Redd Center resources to give a broader public platform and voice to people that are already doing amazing work, but how can we amplify their work and just increase the reach of what we're doing.
I guess I just want to build on a couple of the things that have been alluded to. When I was compiling this 50-year history, I was impressed at how many books the Redd Center has published. It's 8 pages, single-spaced, of the number of books we've published, either as anthologies or other kinds of things. I don't know of any other center that does that to that degree. I noticed that the Young Scholar Program, I think that started under Ed or you? Yeah, that was a big deal. That was to recognize young scholars in various disciplines throughout campus, provide them opportunities to receive the Butler Scholar Award, which provided some funding to help them in their research and development of their projects. We thank the Hazel Butler Peters family and all of the contributions they made to help make that possible. When I came to the center, I was just astounded, like Brendan. In fact, you used to be like in Eastern European history, right? Until you took my American West class. So after Brendan went on to graduate school, I was on the search committee to hire him at the Redd Center, so I was grateful to be part of that. I wanted to also move into the digitization of the records, because there were 50 years of photocopies and mimeographs, other kinds of things. It was hard to know exactly what we had and where we had it. So that's been one of our efforts, is to work with the archives and digitizing the things that we need to, so that there's a digital record available. And I think that'll be something that's lasting. I also want to mention on this Jubilee history, the first half of it is just like our symposium. It's focused on the people sitting here and the things that they did to help thousands of people receive funding. And then the second half of it is about all of the different families. And I think that'll be a nice thing for them to look at some of their ancestors and reflect on the sacrifices they made to make a difference. So if you would like a copy of the history, there'll be a QR code out with the birthday cake to sign up. If you don't know what a QR code is, then you can send me an email and we'll put you on the list.
And if you don't know what an email is, you can just come knock on our door.
Okay, so
You're not mocking technology dummies.
No.
I don't use a GR code.
So ranchers are eternal optimists. It's always going to rain. The prices are always going up. Next year will always be better. But of course, that's not always the case. I grew up in a ranch in Wyoming and Utah, and I often would talk to my brothers. I'm like, this is like gambling, isn't it? We're just hoping something turns out. It's like playing craps or something. Not like that we do that at BYU. We don't gamble. But those from a ranching background know that there's going to be drought, and there's going to be prices that are lower than when you started, and the price of hay is going to be high, and you have to make lots of decisions. So I'm curious, what were some challenges that you faced in your leadership positions at the center, and do they remain, or how were you able to resolve them?
So one of the great ideas that Ed had was for a Western Studies minor. And we had a special class to introduce people to a bunch of disciplines, and I volunteered to teach that class. And we taught it, and we struggled, and we tried to have internships, and well, no one really wanted a Western Studies minor, so finally had to say that was a great idea, didn't work.
One of the challenges that we had while Leonard and I were directors was finding enough money to do the things that we wanted to do. And I think it's quite extraordinary. We published a monograph series, and we had regular monthly lectures for a while, and then people stopped coming to them. So we then decided to have a couple of lectures during the year. And one of the things that we did was to publish the results of those lectures as part of our monograph series. And Elder Holland of the Quorum of the 12 wasn't particularly happy of the title we gave to the series of lectures that he had one in that we published. One of the lectures was about Mark Twain, and it was entitled Soul, Butter, and Hogwash. And so we decided to title the monograph Soul, Butter, and Hogwash and Other Lectures on the American West. And Elder Holland's lecture happened to be in that monograph.
The perennial problem at probably all universities is getting students to realize that the best part of their education happens somewhere else than in the classroom, including at the wonderful opportunities universities generally have for speakers who can address all kinds of topics. And so one of our challenges as we began to establish annual lectures with sponsored by the center was that we typically met in this room or a room of this size and with a very excellent presentation and a very sparse audience. And we didn't ever solve that problem entirely, and I don't suppose we ever will. We did find, however, that if you add to the Redd Center board someone who teaches very popular and large general education courses on campus and have them offer a little bit of extra credit for those who come to the lecture, it is possible to fill up the auditorium.
The Redd Center has delivered on lots of obligations over the years, but there has been one that we have yet to deliver on. Came up in the board meeting today, and that is a biography of Solomon Chamberlain. We have ample funds to do it. We have a historian who has committed to do it, but we have yet to see the actual history.
Yeah, we actually contracted with him, whose name will remain anonymous, while Leonard was director and I was associate director, and I kept after him, when is it we're going to see this manuscript? And he said, well, I'm working on it, I'm working on it. I think he's probably still working on it.
It's been 50 years that he's promised.
It's been a very long time.
Yeah.
He insists that he's going to do it.
We need to find a replacement.
How old is he? Is he going to die soon?
It's older than that.
One good challenge that we faced recently, whereas the first generation, you guys didn't have the funding to do all the things that you wanted to do. Thanks to your hard work, we now have these very generous endowments that allow us to do so many things. And often our problem now is that we're approached by various organizations or people, can you host this? Can you collaborate on this? And so now it's not a funding problem. We often have the funding for it. It's a manpower kind of bandwidth issue. So as our profile is raised and more people are hearing about what the Redd Center is doing and available to help with, just too many people come knocking on the door sometimes, which is a good problem, but sometimes frustrating that there's just so many amazing things we'd like to have, so many pots we'd like to have our fingers in helping with, and we just can't do it all.
So look at all the things the Redd Center has done. Sorry about that. And for a while, I was the only full-time person. The director was half-time. The office staff was half-time. We've done lots of things for a very small staff.
We're just chatting about the manpower problem. One of the things that is helpful, though, is we've been able to leverage a lot of that with student employees and provide them opportunities as research assistants and interns and other kinds of experiential and mentored learning projects. And that's been really helpful because I know Brendan oversees a small team that does some of his Intermountain Histories projects. If you haven't downloaded that app on your phone, find one of your grandchildren and they'll help you get that going. But it's just been a great opportunity to work with more students to have them work on these projects too.
What's the name of the app?
It's called Intermountain Histories. You can find it on your Google Store or Apple Play or whatever. It has a little mountain and a tree, kind of red and green.
It's also a website, intermountainhistories.org.
So let's get personal a little bit as we transition to the birthday cake and then the Redd family. What are some of your memories of your interactions with the Redds and the Butlers and Peters and Embrys and Dixons and Taylors and these wonderful families that we've been working with?
It's not an accident that I'm wearing red. I remember Annalie coming in a red dress. And it's already been alluded to, but when I was researching the bull cells, apparently Charlie would say to every bull seller, we can have a bull cell, so-and-so is here. When we started coming to the bull cell, which we did nothing other than to see all of you amazing people, Annalie would say, we can have a bull cell, the Redd Center is here.
Well, one particularly fond memory that I have, I team taught a field study course for several years called Integrated Natural History of Utah. And one year, Hardy and Sonny hosted our 25 students and 4 faculty members at their ranch. And Hardy took us out on a tour of the ranch, and we went out to a cow camp and went out to an overlook, and we got to watch artificial insemination. So it was a really wonderful, memorable experience for us as faculty and for the students, and very generous of them.
One of the things that I've appreciated being associated with the Redd Center is getting to know the Redd family. They're wonderful people, and I think I've made some good friends among them. We held 2 of our annual meetings at the ranch and another one over at the Indian Creek Ranch. We went on 2 trips across the Holden Rock Trail, the east side. You know, if you go from Escalante, you can just about go in a regular car over to the hole in the rock. The east side is really hard. The first one we went on, I drove a Jeep, and Leonard Arrington sat in the back seat. And the first bump we hit, Leonard grabbed the roll bar, and I think he held on to it the whole rest of the time. When we drove into a box canyon, and I wondered why we were doing that, I was driving behind Hardy. I think he was in a Bronco. And I just wondered where he was going. And he turned and went up the side of a mountain. And I figured, well, if he can go up that mountain with a Bronco, I certainly can with a Jeep. So that's what happened. And then we got to this big crack. And we had to unload everybody from the cars, and those of us who were brave enough straddled it and drove across. That was a great experience. It rained, and Annalise said she wondered why we were doing this. Just meeting with these people, these friends, and getting to know them was a wonderful experience, and it's one of the most wonderful things that I can think of after having been associated with the Redd Center.
And I go to the bull sale, and Paul's really busy, but he's willing to talk to the Redd Center, and Hardy would talk to us, and it would just be just great fun to learn about what makes a good bowl. And over the years, as I would show up with some Cummings chocolates, Diane's eyes would just light up. It was just amazing.
There we are. I don't think anyone who ever experienced Annalise's strength and graciousness would ever forget her. And so that certainly was a highlight. The time there, one time we went down, I think, not on anything official, but dropped in the old ranch house where she was spending the summer, and visited, and of course, no one will ever forget the prairie fire beans recipe either, or kind of discussing world intellectual history in Hardy's living room. So they are wonderful experiences. Carl Butler was also a wonderful personality, I should mention, and very approachable, very interesting, remarkable person in terms of his accomplishments, but fairly modest about it. I remember he telling it one time that before Ernest Wilkinson became the president of BYU, the board was looking at their final candidates and invited both Ernest Wilkinson and Carl Butler to come and interview with the board. And both men shared a room at the Hotel Utah during their stay. And after they had their interviews, Ernest asked Carl, what do you think? Do you think you'll get it? And Carl said, well, I don't expect so, and I'm not sure that's really what I want to do with my life at this time. And he said, Ernest said, I really want the job.
I'd like to say also that it was a pleasure for me to get to know Dennis Peters and the Peters family, and they're the ones who introduced me, at least, to the broader Redd family reunions, and we got a big family photo of the entire Redd family that hangs in the history department, and so that was a pleasure to make connections to your family and to the broad Redd family.
I always appreciated getting together with Carl Butler. Some of you may not know that Carl was on Ezra Taft Benson's staff in the agriculture department while Ezra Taft Benson was Secretary of Agriculture. Carl would come to the Redd Center, we'd talk with one another. I could spend a lot of time talking with him. He would tell us about the initiatives that they started and things that they were doing. And I really appreciated my association with Carl. He was a great man and very interesting to speak with.
So along this line, part of the money from the Peters account comes because Hazel Peters had agreed to give some money, and when she passed away, Carl called up and I took the phone call, and Carl said, my sister's passed away. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And he said, don't be, make sure you get the money.
Yeah, Carl had told me that he'd made arrangements for them to donate money to the Redd Center, and that increased our endowment appreciably, the money that the Peters family gave us, largely because of Carl's intercession with the family.
I joined the board over 10 years ago when Brian appointed me, and I really enjoyed it. First of all, I grew up on a ranch. I was a 4-H junkie and the livestock judge. Our team won the Denver Stock Show livestock judging competition, which was a pretty big deal. And so when we went down to the bull sale the first time, I was pointing out which bulls I would buy, and Jesse's like, you actually seem like you know what you're talking about. So it's been a lot of fun to get to know you as the children, but as I was doing this history, I got to know your parents and your grandparents and great-grandparents, and just feel a kinship and affinity because my kind of people, so appreciate that. For our final few minutes, if you want to just provide any closing remarks or any ideas about the vision for the future. We started that in.
I think probably I've said enough.
My position at the Redd Center was administrative staff, and now fortunately Brendan's position is faculty. My sad but happy moment was that Bert Wilson and the dean at the time went out of their way to try to make it into a faculty position. It didn't happen, but I was grateful that people saw the advantages of what I was doing. And it was always nice because Ed supported that I did lots of stuff.
I would say is, let's keep on this path for another 50 years. We're doing good work.
Just in the board meeting earlier today, Jay was sharing the amount of money that has been distributed in scholarships and grants over the years. It was 2-point-something million. I think it's a huge amount of money, so you really see the ways that philanthropy keeps giving and benefits future generations, and so I'm just so grateful to all of you as family members for your contributions and your support for these things that we've done at the Redd Center.
Yeah, I would say, it's difficult for us to go to conferences and not constantly be approached by people who say, oh, you're at the Redd Center, I got a small grant from the Redd Center when I was a master's student 25 years ago, or just the number of people, not just students and professors, but public institutions that have benefited from philanthropy and ongoing support. It's hard to quantify, but it's really broad and really impressive to see.
Yeah, I shared the amount with the board, but I didn't share the list because it's about 90 pages long of all the people who've received awards. But now we have that list, and it is impressive to look back on the hundreds and hundreds of faculty, students, independent researchers, public programming, museums, you name it, that the Redd Center has been supportive of. So it's time to eat cake. Happy birthday to us. We're going to convene for the birthday cake around the corner, and then we'll come back here at 3:15 for the Redd Family Reminiscences.